I feel like I've accomplished so much today. I must have infected half the world. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 462 of the Dead Robot Society. Terry Mixon here. Joining me, Paul E. Cooley. How you doing, man?
We survived! We survived! We survived!
Whew, it's a good thing we recorded that dang show last week early.
Yeah.
We were very lucky that we didn't lose our internet connectivity. Seriously.
Internet, power, water, you know, all the important things in life.
First world problems.
First world problems, baby. Yeah, first world problem. Well, yeah, one of them is first world. The other two, modern society. Yeah, okay. Electricity you could do without water, not so much.
So is it ironic that we were talking about natural disasters and then it turned into the biggest natural disaster in U.S. history?
Yeah, I don't know about ironic. I think we both knew that was coming.
We knew it was going to be bad. We didn't quite know how bad because, for example, my neck of the woods, the nearest rain gauge to me recorded 49.4 inches of rain in 4 days. 50 inches. And somebody on the internet said, only in Southeast Texas is it now appropriate to walk up to a stranger and ask, so
how many inches
did you get?
I think we only got 34 up here. Only 34.
Yeah. It's interesting when you can say the words only and 34 inches of rain in 4 days.
Yeah.
And it's true.
I think we got basically half of our annual rainfall in 4 days, or all of our annual rainfall in 4 days.
I know that we did down here. I believe we actually exceeded our annual rainfall in those 4 days.
That's a lot of water. That's a lot of water.
It's still around. I saw a picture on the news yesterday of Beltway 8 somewhere up north, and it looks like a canal. It's still full of water because they're going to be releasing water from those two reservoirs for 10 days.
Yep. Not to mention the two breached levees.
Did they actually fully breach? I think they managed to patch them up.
They did manage to patch them up, but not until after they had already breached. Was my understanding on one of those. Well, so folks, what you're going to see is you are going to see if there's any sense in Texas state legislature, you're going to see massive regulations passed after this that they should have put in 50 years ago.
What will they regulate?
Not allowing these fucking developers to build this stupid shit in areas where, hey, we need that area for runoff. Don't build there. Instead, when the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA came in and said, don't do this, Greg fucking Abbott and his dipshit sued to get that blocked. And so here we go. Now we've got, that's probably about 10 billion of this price that's going to take to rebuild this area with all those people displaced and everything else.
If they clean out all the areas that are flood prone, where do you go? The 500-year floodplain? The 1,000-year floodplain?
You have to move somewhere that's not near a goddamn body of water, first of all.
I agree with you. And the problem is I don't know how far away is safe.
Well, Spring Creek went up here, went 30, 40 feet out of its banks. My subdivision got no water. Most of the woodlands got no water. The only parts of the woodlands that got water were the ones that were next to the fucking creek.
About half my subdivision got water that were nearest to the bayou.
Right. So you're going to have to do something. What I've got a problem with is that we're going to use all this money to rebuild for these people in the same fucking place, guaranteeing it's going to happen again. Because we learned nothing.
I have no idea what they're going to do. I know that in some places, once they establish that it's floody, you have to actually raise the homes.
Yeah.
If you're going to stay there, you gotta put them up in the air.
I think all of Southeast Houston is going to be, I mean, you just might as well write it off. Don't allow people to build there anymore. Just be done with it. Everything's going to have to be destroyed anyway. Just remove it all, make it into a massive drainage area and be done with it. Let it go back to being wet.
Where's everybody going to live? That's awesome.
You're going to have to relocate them. You have to build new homes anyway. Why not just pick them up and move them? They're already screwed. There's nothing left there.
I feel very sorry for those people because I don't know what other folks know, but probably less than 20% of those people have flood insurance.
Sure.
That's what they said on the news.
And most of them wouldn't have had enough money to buy flood insurance, even if they could.
My wife and I have flood insurance. We live in an area that requires it.
Right.
Because we live in Galveston County and we're actually in the 500-year floodplain. So we're required to have it by law. I can't remember how much it is. It's not truly outrageous. I want to say it's something like $500 a year, something like that. It's not terrible, but
well, the areas in southeast, the areas in southeast Houston that got annihilated the most are the ones where the indigent and the poverty folks live. So I mean,
why is that?
Because that's. Do you really want me to get on this?
How does that even work? I mean, is it? I don't want to really dig into it, but is that because the people with more money build on higher ground? Do they know these things? How does that even happen?
It was because the land was cheaper in southeast Houston. It's much cheaper in the areas that are prone to flooding. It's much cheaper in the areas that are south of downtown. It just is.
All right.
So,
I accept that. I hadn't thought about it that much, but it's true.
And, if that's the case, it's where you're going to build the tract housing. That's going to be where you build the cheap apartments. That's where you're going to build shotgun shacks. I talk about in flames. That's where all that stuff's going to go. And it's been there for forever. So now's the time to fix it.
One of the problems, though, with dealing with the floods as they are is we've had in Houston in the last, I think, 20 years, 3 500-year floods.
Oh, this one was a millennial flood.
Well, they upgraded it after talking that. In fact, somebody else, I don't even know where the number came from, said this is a once in a 40,000 year flood.
Which I think is bullshit.
I think we're getting into hyperbole now, folks.
Because I think we're going to see another one of these later this year. It may not be here, but it's coming. Yeah.
I can't wait to see my flood insurance after this. Although at this point, having survived the most rain, the worst rain disaster in the country, and not gotten water in the house, I feel pretty confident of my drainage right now.
Yeah. Right now.
If it comes and floods my house, I might as well just get on the boat and take that 3-hour tour because I'm with Gilligan. We're headed for the island.
Yeah. I think we're just going to head north now and not ever come back here. It'll be time for you to move to Oregon. And then, of course, the tsunami will follow you. So that's how it's going to work.
There's always a natural disaster somewhere, which is a great place to go ahead and segue into this week's episode.
Now, before we get into this, just remember, when we recorded this, we were both looking at, I don't know, rain was coming down sideways all over the place. So forgive Armenia, just like you should have forgiven Armenia for last week's introduction to the episode.
I guess we should briefly talk about our weekly doings. I wrote a short story that's going out into another Four Horsemen universe anthology and got it off to my first reader. Sales on Heart of Vengeance have been far, far beyond where I expected they would be. And it actually got me my first orange bestseller tag on Amazon. And for a brief period of time, I had a book that was the #1 military science fiction book in that category. So I can now amend my bio. I have made it.
So now Terry can put on his business cards. Badass. That's what
right.
Put on his business cards.
That's right. I'm already having them all reprinted now. Mm-hmm. It's going to be bold, italicized. I hope to still go ahead and get Battle for Terra wrapped up before the end of the month. And then I'll turn around. I've got one more short story to write at that point, and then right back into the second book that I'm working with Glenn. Cool. Deadlines, got stuff coming.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing to have. Deadlines are a good thing to have. I am still almost finished with Flames. Seems like I've been saying that for weeks, but every time I turn around, there's like a new landmine sitting in front of me.
You have been saying it for weeks. I think you're overthinking it, man.
Well, you just got to remember that this book was written over 4 years, and the plot changed, and I changed some things at the end, and I had to go be very, very careful with fixing stuff. So it's taken a while to basically fix everything that needed to be fixed, because I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave continuity problems. I didn't want to have plot problems, and on top of it, I needed to make sure I planted the foreshadowing necessary for the readers at the end not to feel like they were ripped off. You know, not to scream Deus Ex Machina, you fucking lazy son of a bitch. So I want to make sure I address those things. Hopefully, I've addressed them. I've had to write, I think, probably 2 new scenes and amend several other chapters. So there was some serious work to do, and it took some thinking. There were some days where it's just basically I was going back and comparing the new stuff I've written to the old stuff and looking at the differences in voice for each of the characters. I mean, I wanted to get it right because I like this book a lot. I want to get it right. So it's probably still going to be fucked up. Hopefully the beta readers will find any other dangling threads. So that's basically where that is. I will have it finished. I think if I'm really lucky, I'll have it finished tomorrow night. So, and then get it off to Sue and maybe a couple of folks I know want to beta read it. So we'll see.
All right. I am sure that it's going to be awesome when it comes out. And I hope you have, some killer success with it.
I need to get a book cover.
Uh-oh, covers. We're gonna have to have a show on covers.
Then I have to then I have to record the audiobook.
There's your production. There's your productivity problem right there. Audiobook recording.
Yeah, actually, this will be easier to record than Derelict was. So that'll help. That'll help a lot. It'll help. So let's hope it goes better. Let's hope.
I'm sure that it will.
So speaking of apocalypses, let's get into this show.
So tell me, Paul, what are you doing for the end of the world?
For the end of the world, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Putting my head between my knees and kissing my ass goodbye.
You are so flexible. It must be all that yoga you do.
Oh yeah, I really got the joints for yoga. Let me tell you. Right now I'm wearing a knee brace because my one of my ligaments seems to have decided to go south on me.
Welcome to old age, you young whippersnapper.
Yeah, shut up. If this is the case, I had old age when I was 30.
Mentally, yeah.
Ooh, that's bad. Anyway, what are you asking about the end of the world for? Why would you bring that up?
Because Harvey is busy flooding the entirety of Houston.
Who is this Harvey? Who's this Harvey?
Harvey's a bastard. He's a bastard.
He's a total bastard. Yeah, we're not talking about the big white rabbit that Jimmy Stewart can't see, or only Jimmy Stewart can see and talk to. We're talking about Hurricane Harvey, which is now Tropical Storm Harvey.
Yep. And so it's busy flooding Houston, the greater Houston area. And it's brought to mind various natural disasters that they have in movies and books that we all like to write about in one way or another. I say that, but you may be surprised, but you could probably incorporate a natural disaster of this scale into your writing in some way, no matter what the genre that you're dealing with. Sure. And so I thought we should talk about how to incorporate a widespread disaster, whether it be natural or man-made, into your fiction.
Okay. I've got some experience with this. I kind of wrote that into both Arrival and Outbreak.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact. And also, I guess you could also say it's in the black.
I've wrote one post-apocalyptic novel that involved both natural and man-made elements of a major disaster. And the first thing that jumps out to me that I want to mention...
What's the name of the book?
Oh, Scorched Earth.
Ding, ding. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not usually into the whole self-promotion thing.
You gotta be, damn it. If there's people watching this on YouTube who've never seen this show before, never seen us, you need to talk to them about this shit.
I just totally forgot.
Yeah.
I'll have to be more of a pimp dog.
You got to pimp your shit, baby.
We need to get a real dinger.
Yeah, I know. I need to take some Patreon.
We'll have to get 2 of them so we can ding 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 ding.
Patreon. I just said Patreon crash. Some Patreon cash and get one of those while I'm ordering your new webcam, because you still look like somebody smeared Vaseline all over my screen.
Well, I'm sorry. That's Vaseline that's smeared all over my face. My bad. I didn't realize it would show up.
Okay. All right. We got off topic again. Scorched Earth. Continue.
Scorched Earth. The one thing that I noticed when I was writing about that type of thing is that you can introduce an element of disaster, and the first thing that pops up is that you have no idea what the unforeseen consequences of that are going to be. And that's half the fun of writing that kind of book, is because you can make something horrible happen, and then you say, what's that going to do? What possible things is that going to affect, and how is that going to complicate my characters' lives? For example, in Scorched Earth, it starts off with a coronal mass ejection. So you have a big old blob of plasma from the sun slam into the earth.
I'm sorry. I just went into erotica land there for a second. Continue.
I can't even, maybe I should talk about the hot streamers of plasma.
Continue. Keep it rolling.
Other than making the nice, pretty aurora borealis, it can be a very dangerous thing. There was an event that happened in the 1860s, I think it was, called the Carrington event. And it was such a large-scale coronal mass ejection that struck the Earth that it produced auroras down to Cuba.
Wow.
So we're talking some serious, serious shit here. If it had been a technological society at that point, it would have been a disaster of the first order. As it was, the telegraph lines, they started arcing energy. People would disconnect the batteries from the telegraph lines. They would still be powered.
Wow.
You could continue sending information through the unpowered lines because just the electrical arcs coming from the positively charged, the charged particles were keeping it going. It would cause fires in telegraph offices. It injured a number of people, but that's really the extent of what it was. It was just pretty. If something like that happened today, it might kill billions of people. Billions of people. And it hardly seems like, that's something that is even likely. But those things happen. We had a near miss 10, 15 years ago. A major coronal mass ejection passed right in front of the Earth. Just a difference of a few degrees, and that sucker would have smacked straight into us and caused global catastrophe. The first thing that something like that might do, and what I used it for in mine, is it might kill the power grid.
Right. It essentially turns into an EMP.
It in a way, an EMP is different than a coronal mass ejection in the things it does. A coronal mass ejection, I could dig out I have a reference novel, a reference book that I actually looked into and explained what the differences of what could happen with a coronal mass ejection versus an EMP. And there are some separate things. They're similar, but they can have totally different layers of it, because I also had an EMP attack take place during the novel. So yeah, I had to know the difference. I'm not going to get into those. If you want to know what the differences are,
go read the book.
Read Scorched Earth and you can find out. But once you start talking about something like the power grid going down, you start thinking about, well, how is that going to affect food delivery? How is that going to affect other things?
How is it going to affect the dissemination of clean water through the lines?
Mm-hmm. And so every major impact of something, whether it be a forest fire, a tidal wave, an EMP, a coronal mass ejection, it's going to have some effect that's going to have a domino, that's going to knock other things over. And that's half the fun of writing those novels, is creating plot complications for your characters and saying, well, it's bad, and now it's worse, and now it's worse.
This goes back to the three rules, right? Who are these people? What do they want? And how can I keep them from getting it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's you know, the most succinct way I've ever heard a storyteller's job, you know, described. And in the instances of natural disasters, Jesus Christ, I don't know if any of you, or how many of you grew up in the 70s. How many freaking airport movies were there?
And we're not talking the airplane movies. We're talking the airport movies.
The airplane movies were made to lampoon the airport movies. That's how that worked. So how many of those? We had what? Airport? I don't know. There was Airport, which was the first one. Then there was like Airport 73 or something like that. And I think the last one I remember was 79 with the Concorde. Featured. It was basically a commercial for Air France is what it was, in the worst ways. But my favorite is remembering, I think it was on the Carol Burnett show where they did a send-up of it. And they had, oh God, who was the guy that played the love interest in Wonder Woman, the TV series? I can't remember the name of his name now. Kyle something or other. Anyway, he was on the show, and they had him bouncing on a trampoline to get to the plane to go pilot it. It was absolutely ludicrous. And yet the airport movies, the later ones, were kind of like Sharknado. How far can we take this? So it fit really well. Anyway, so the 70s, in the 70s, we had the earthquake movies, we had the hurricane movies, we had movies about typhoons, we had the Killer Bee movie where they froze all the killer bees in the Astrodome, which is such bullshit, unbelievable bullshit. We had God, what else? I think there was an ant movie made around that time. 70s were like, everybody was so into natural disaster films or crazed animal things. It was just nuts. And it lingered a little bit into the 80s, and then it kind of went away for the most part. We saw a little bit of a resurgence in the 1990s with, I think, movies like Volcano, which had Tommy Lee Jones in it, and and then the stuff that was based on a volcano like Mount St. Helens going off. There were a lot of different ways that people are looking at this about natural disasters, creating those films. If those films are there, I know the books are there. I'm just not cognizant of them.
There was one that involved an ocean liner.
You're talking about Speed 2?
No, way back. Not Speed 2. I want to say it was Titanic, but it was not Titanic. It was something else, a disaster movie where the ocean liner is sinking. So they weren't shy. The
Poseidon Adventure?
That's it, the Poseidon Adventure. And they were not shy about exploring everything. Buildings on fire, everything was fair game for those type of movies, and people just ate it up.
Yeah, there was a building, Towering Inferno.
Towering Inferno is what I was thinking of, yes.
Yeah, Steve McQueen, Rock Hudson. Everybody was in that freaking movie. Yeah, that's the one you're thinking of, the Towering Inferno. Yeah.
So those were a huge thing at one point, and you can bet that the hunger for that type of thing in fiction is not gone.
No, I think actually it's going to ramp up because think about all the crazy shit that has happened just in the last 10 years. Okay. The hurricanes increasing in severity. You had the massive tsunami that wiped out everybody in Indonesia or Micronesia. And then you had the nuclear accident in Japan caused by another tsunami. And now you've got this massive flood stuff going on. We've got volcanoes are going off or getting ready to go off in other areas.
Huge fires that we've had that have burned up areas.
That's right. In fact, they're just making a new movie. I saw the preview for it's coming out about the Stony Mountain hotshots or something like that.
Is that the one that burned down that entire town?
Yeah.
I am not surprised to hear that they're going to make a movie about it.
Yeah, they're making a film about that. But even stuff like mine accidents, right? Where we had those
guys in the Peruvian mines.
Yeah, the guys in the mines in various countries. there's all this crazy crap that's going on right now, which is basically man versus nature. And if you're a believer in the, you know, the 7 types of conflict or however many there are, that is a big one in there. And it's been in stories as long as we can remember, this man versus nature thing. If you go look at the floods that are talked about in all the literature, including the Bible, but it first shows up in Epic of Gilgamesh and other things, that was a constant deal. It was just a way of life. If you lived on the Tigris Euphrates, you were going to experience a flood at some point, just like you were going to experience a drought. So you got these natural disasters, which are drought, where things burn, where animals are dying, where livestock are dying. You've got all these problems that goes on there. You got pestilence involved with that. Then if you flood, you've also got pestilence going along with that. And it's the same kind of thing. The livestock dies and the agriculture dies. It just dies differently. So all these things are kind of coming to a head, and I think it's a very fertile ground for you to put, use as a catalyst for people getting together and doing the stupid.
I'm going to come back to the consequences that you just talked about, because that's the logical next place to go. But I did bring up a web page to, in a couple of paragraphs, talk about the difference between an EMP and a CME.
Go.
An EMP is caused by an atomic blast is a high frequency pulse and can cause problems with individual pieces of equipment. If you're hit with an EMP attack, there are plenty of things to worry about with your handheld items. You can put them in Faraday cages to protect them. On the other hand, a CME, which emanates from the sun, is a low frequency event and has an impact on anything with a long antenna, like power lines and pipes.
Ooh.
So that's the big difference. So that's the big difference is that an EMP is going to hit your phone, in your car, whereas a CME is not going to have as much effect on handheld devices, but is going to create wide scale havoc. And I explored both of those events in Scorched Earth so that I could pile them on top of one another and make everyone's situation just a little bit worse.
Why would you do that to your characters? Aren't these people you love? Aren't these figments of your imagination you brought into the universe out of fucking whole cloth? And obviously you like them. Even if you hate them, you like them, you love them, to bring them out. Why would you do this to them?
Because Paul E. Cooley told me I had to.
No, Paul E. Cooley tells you have to kill some of them.
I don't know that I actually killed any of them, but
yeah, see, you wuss.
Because I'm a wuss. That's kind of how I roll. It's more like an adventure novel. Plenty of people die though, because you start talking about consequences, and
yes,
that's something that we need to deal here. Like the flooding that we're experiencing in Houston, even as we record this, the event is going to end in the next few days. The next week, the water will recede. The consequences will be with this area for months and years to come. So even once you cause a disaster of some kind, merely having the event go away again does not fix the problem. And probably nothing will fix the problem for whatever it is. Your characters are going to be engaged in some type of survival situation where they must escape the area that is affected by this, if it's a small enough area, or they're going to have to find a way to overcome the problems that are going to be there for quite a while.
Right.
And it doesn't even have to be something as big as the collapse of civilization.
No, it doesn't.
It can be dealing with the fact that you've got to feed your kids and there's nothing to be found. It can be dealing with the fact that you need water and it's all polluted. There are plenty of aspects of this that can complicate your characters' lives that are natural, logical outflow of what you just did to them.
Right.
And that's really where you've got to go.
And then we're talking about, we're talking about incidents that actually could realistically happen. Mm-hmm. That's not even including the crazy shit you can dream up. But in reality, when I went to New Orleans for a preseason game years ago, I think it was 4 or 5 years after Katrina, they still had houses that were barely standing that had all the red marks, and the red marks, the red X's meant people had died there. And for each corpse found in that house, it had a red X on it. Now, all these properties were condemned, but nobody had gotten around to taking them down yet. And it's just because there were so many of them. They had, I mean, all these places were condemned. Nobody could live there, but they were instantly part of history because people drowned in the second floors of, in the attics of these houses. And
here's a note for yourself, kids. If you live in a flooding area, put an axe in your attic.
Yeah. No, or actually,
I'm totally being serious here. This is not a joke. If you live in an area where you think you might be flooded, put an axe in the attic because you will thank me later.
Either that or don't go into the attic at all, because
the mayor of Houston was telling people on television yesterday or the day before, don't go into your attic unless you have an axe or a way out of your attic, because you might find yourself trapped and die there.
Right.
And that's totally serious. It doesn't get more serious than that.
No.
So yeah, never mind. I've gotten off on my thing there. You talk about events that are realistic. Let's look at some that writers might not think are realistic or might hope never happen. Tom Clancy wrote in the book Executive Orders about enemies of the United States using commercial aircraft as weapons. He had them blow up Congress with a 737, wasn't a 737, 767 maybe, 777, not sure what size it was.
One of those big monsters.
One of the big ones. He had a pilot crash it into Congress while Congress was in session. And so that was a huge part of Executive Orders and the plot that resolved around that. And then 9/11 happened. And from what I've been able to tell, it really messed him up. Predicting something like that really, really screwed him up for a while. And so you may think that, you're being ha 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 when you write these things, but nobody knows what's going to go on. In Scorched Earth, ding, 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 the EMP comes from the fact that North Korea launched satellites in orbit that actually were nuclear weapons. That is not so far-fetched anymore.
No, not really. And that's where, we're getting into this far-fetchedness. So we have, I think here in Houston anyway, in the ship channel, I think they had a 6 to 12 foot storm surge. And what that means is 6 to 12 feet of standing water came in to the ship channel. Now, that's a lot of water. That means the normal water level was raised by 6 to 12 feet. That means anything that was swept along with that comes in to the channel. And theoretically, when the storm surge leaves, it could get trapped in the ship channel. It could get trapped in places where maybe it needs to be deeper, and now the water is not deep enough for it to get back out. So it's going to be there.
Jelly Gator NATO.
Loch Ness Monster, anyone? So the bottom line is, think about organisms that come in and get trapped there, and then they have time to breed. What's going to happen to the ecosystem? And something like that alone can really fuck up an area, especially if someplace like in Louisiana where they have all the wetlands and all the, you have a lot of environmental threats already. But imagine if that kind of stuff happened to the wetlands and suddenly destroyed basically all the life there. It could happen. That's something that really could happen. Those ideas, what happens if we get another tsunami, only this time it hits Miami? Or it hits New Orleans or Houston, Galveston, whatever. What's going to be the results of that? How bad is it going to get? What are the first responders going to do? Are there going to be people 30 years after that where maybe the sea level stays higher? Maybe the storm surge comes in and it never really goes away for whatever reason. Are there going to be explorers going under there and finding all sorts of crazy stuff amidst the pollution? Are there going to be cleanup crews? What is their experience going to be? Imagine people having to go look for the dead in buildings and whatnot that get flooded. There's a lot of different opportunities to target, and it doesn't have to necessarily be the victims. It could easily be the people who are going in afterwards to try and save them, which are really interesting books anyway. I mean, think about the movie. If you haven't seen the movie or read the book A Perfect Storm, that's what I'm getting at, is the fact that you basically have three different tales going on there. You have the folks out on the boat, you've got the folks in the town, and then you've got the poor National Guard, Coast Guard assholes going out there trying to save people. So you have three different stories going on, three completely different sets of characters and different jobs and whatnot, but it works. And you have to have those multiple viewpoints to understand exactly just how monumental an event that was and get all the effects of it. That is the kind of thing that I think Terry and I are talking about. Obviously, it doesn't have to be that large in scope, but those books and stories were popular for a reason, which is it really touches on people's fears. In the Midwest, you've got tornadoes, you've got all sorts of stuff with that. You still have torrential rains on the occasion. You've got blizzards in the north, and down here, obviously in the south, we got the dangers of things coming into the Gulf and destroying us. And that goes for anything on the coast. The coast is obviously the most vulnerable part of any continent. It's going to be the part that gets smashed the most regularly by anything, at least in my mind. I can't think of anything else besides maybe fire. That wouldn't be on the coast. That would be in places where humans are stupid and keep trying to build where they shouldn't be building, because forests have to replenish. And if they don't, then they burn. And when they burn big, it's everybody out of the pool. Anyway, that notwithstanding, here's another idea. What happens, like he brought up the water thing. What happens when a refinery blows up? What happens when maybe the water comes in on top and a refinery fire happens? Suddenly you've got thousands or millions and millions of gallons of water that are now polluted with oil and chemicals from refining and everything else. I mean, it's shit like that. And it can cause real problems. And those are fertile grounds for stories. And as I'm talking about this, I'm like, God damn it, I need to write one of these.
There's, I forget exactly where they are, but there are some large cliffs. Maybe it's the Canary Islands that they keep saying, what happens if this whole thing shears off, which is eventually going to happen at some point.
Are you talking about the White Cliffs of Dover?
Maybe I am. I can't remember which it is, but they hypothesize that when these cliffs go, that it's going to cause a mega tsunami that's going to take the eastern seaboard of the U.S. and smash it.
Interesting.
So we're not even talking like a super volcano blowing up and something like Yellowstone just destroying the United States by going off. I'm pretty much convinced now that we're all going to die. Because, we just went through all of these things. We're doomed.
As Jim Morrison said, nobody gets out of here alive. It's a true statement. In the Blacks,
no one can escape death. You are merely being judged by how you run.
Exactly. When I wrote The Black, ding, 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 I used a massive weather is great for keeping your characters bottled up. It just is. I used a storm there to keep them from being able to get help and expect help, besides the fact that they weren't going to get any to begin with, but it added a complication on top of everything else. I used that in Arrival, and I used it in Outbreak, the other two books in the Black too, which take place in the Houston area. The reason for that was to make it more complicated for first responders, for folks to get in and help.
And restricting communication is great for keeping people on edge.
Absolutely. So basically, when people are having a phone call and suddenly the lights go out, the phone goes dead, whatever else, great moment. Who hasn't sit there and, you've got the protagonist dialing 911 or calling his buddy or whatever else, puts the phone up, get out 3 words, and then the phone's dead. I mean, it just leaves you with this shiver, because Imagine what would happen if you're trying to explain to somebody, this is kind of awful, I can't believe I'm going to talk about this, but during Hurricane Ike, although they were warned to not do it, some people were stupid enough to stay in their beach houses. Somebody called into, I can't remember if it was KTRK or KHOU, one of the local TV stations, and they were begging for help. They were on the second floor of their beach house, and the water was 3 feet above the second floor. And they were calling for help. Well, guess what? There was nobody who could get to them. They died. I mean, period in the story. They fucking died. So my evil brain says, what happens when that person calls? You get it from their perspective that it's not coming. There's no help coming. It's one of those moments that has got to be absolutely terrifying to a human being. I mean, even just the thought of it kind of gives me goosebumps, because you know that if people could get to you, they could help you, but they can't. There's no way they can. When you start piling on these complications, you give your characters, you get them into a boiler room. You get to them to the point where it's not just the stress of whatever particular situation they're in. It's complicated by weather, by some other natural disaster. The real conflict may be between two people trying to get the same thing. The rest of the disaster going on around them, that's the backdrop. It doesn't have to be the prime mover. It is the backdrop. It is the conceit that puts these people in the same place. So you don't have to go into, thousands of words about the disaster itself, but you're just using that as a constant backdrop. And every time these people get outside, they have to wear gas masks, or they have to get in their waders, get in their boat, whatever the hell it is. Every time they do that, you're basically making the reader remember that, hey, there's this other thing going on. And you don't have to keep hitting them with it directly. You do it subtly by adding those little pieces to it. The fact that they've got to suit up before they go outside, the fact that, they're dragging sandbags in front of the house, whatever else. You have these opportunities to use those as great complications to keep your characters on edge, and therefore keep the reader on edge. God, we're in thriller land here. Thriller land, suspense thriller land. I love it.
Yeah. You could tie these into any genre that you want to. Romance, you can certainly pile on a massive storm or a fire to get everybody moving around, an earthquake.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't think of any genre that this is off limits as a plot complication.
So here's a plot idea I probably won't run with. There are a lot of homeless in inner city Houston. What happens when they don't get to the shelters? The shelters actually get flooded. What happens? It's pretty awful to think about, and it's probably already happened. But the bottom line is, these are the things I think about. There's rife opportunities to go after that. I mean, go after those situations. And this stuff is not far-fetched. Like we said, this is stuff that is happening right now, 20 miles south of me. This is shit that's going on. So in fact, it wouldn't surprise me if in 2 years we see a bunch of goddamn Harvey books. In fact, it may take 3 months or 2 months. Shit.
I'll get writing. I want to see a Harvey thriller.
Chuck Tingle's writing one right now. When Harvey smashed into my butt with my own butt.
I wish I could say that I doubt it, but I don't. I
don't either. So it doesn't have to be post-apocalypse. Post-apocalypse is fun because you get to remake the world. And you're using the old world as this memory, and you've got these people who are, walking their way through what was, and there's also this constant fight to get it back. And sometimes you really don't want it back, in some ways. But the bottom line is, the people who lived during the time when it was taken away are the ones who are going to fight like hell to get some semblance of that back. Their children, maybe not as much. And 2 or 3 generations down the line, is anybody really going to remember what it was like? They can read books, or watch movies or whatever else, but are they really going to connect with it? It's going to seem like fantasy land to them.
It's hard to connect to emotions if you don't have a frame of reference.
Yeah.
And it's like somebody that lived through World War I or World War II trying to explain trench warfare to people that came later.
You mean
they just
to
cannot understand.
Modern military, they're fighting with drones where they're piloting a ship from 3,000 miles away? Yeah, it's shit like that. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. It just changes the equation completely. And, you know, in another generation or two, people are going to call World War I, World War II fake news. I mean, it's going to just be another part of the Holocaust conspiracy or whatever the hell else you want to call it. And that is terrifying, but history does slip. It slips from our minds. And once we don't keep it alive, it just goes away, which is a horrible thing, but we've seen it happen before in a relatively short period of time. So it is kind of frightening. So when you build your post-apocalyptic novel, these are things that you can put in there. What happens to these people 3 generations down the line? Maybe it's not as interesting, or maybe it's more interesting than what the people did during the first, immediately after the apocalypse. Maybe 2 or 3 generations down the line is what you want to talk about, and how everything changed. And the fact that they have no frames of reference for this.
S.M. Sterling wrote a series of books in what he calls his Emberverse. It started off with the novel called Dies the Fire, where something changed the universal laws and things like firearms no longer worked, electricity no longer worked. It was a somewhat mystical sort of thing.
Right, yeah.
But the book started shortly before the event took place. And it went on, as the story went on, several generations past this. Where you're talking children that grew up that never experienced the civilized world, yet the remains of the corpse of the civilized world are all around them.
Yeah.
But they couldn't understand what their parents were talking about.
No,
they had no frame of reference.
Imagine if sea level goes up by, say, 30 feet. Okay. And let's say Houston got flooded. Let's say Houston had, I don't know, 20 feet of standing water in it somehow. All those people would know is the fractured skeletons of the skyscrapers. That's all they would know. They would have absolutely no touchstone with the fact that people used to work in cubicles in there. The fact that there's all this ancient technology, ancient, quote unquote, technology sitting in there. They would have no idea what is in there at all. And of course, in my mind, that means they'd have to explore it.
There was a book that I read that I cannot recall the title of right now, but the protagonist was somebody that did underwater salvage under just such a circumstance as that. The technology was still there, and the water level's 20, 30 feet high. And so what do? They go to places like Houston and Galveston, and they dive and salvage things.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
Yeah. I think Pete Thoreau maybe wrote a book called Ozone. Wait. I mean, this is early 80s, maybe. Or maybe something you want to check out. I can't remember the author's name. I'd have to look it up. But it was rather interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about the same damn book.
I'll find it again once we're done with the episode. You okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
When you start glancing off screen, we go, uh-oh.
I'm just yeah. Anyway,
in case you believe that, well, things like this just can't happen, I happen to glance at the Harris County flood warning system right now.
Shit, don't do it. Your browser will explode.
I already did. I had it up in a different tab anyway. The location that I live at has had right at 40 inches of rain in the last 7 days. Jesus. An inch and a half of that was not involved with with this storm. The rest of it has been dumped just since the storm arrived. And they're still expecting another 10, 15 inches of rain. So the water level might actually rain my own height in this week. So think big when you think your natural disaster.
There's a graphic out there, and I haven't verified its veracity, but the verified its veracity, is that redundant?
A little bit.
I have not verified that it is actual. No, verified its veracity. No, I don't think that is. It just sounds redundant. Anyway, Terry's over there on dictionary.com looking this shit up. The basically, to calculate the amount of water that has fallen, they took the rainfall gauges and then complicated it by how many square miles Houston is, and then did an area calculation. And it was something like it was just ridiculous. It was basically an amount, the water, if you put all the water that has fallen in there, I think it was like 9 trillion gallons, it would fill up the entire island of Manhattan and would go up something like 200 feet high. It's just insane, just absolutely insane. So yeah, and that's just in the Houston area. That has nothing to do with the rest of the state. So yeah, it's bad. So your apocalypse disaster happens just by watching news reports.
Yeah. The book I was thinking of is called Blind Waves by Stephen Gould. Okay.
Oh, Stephen Gould. All right.
Oh, you know him. I have no idea.
No, I may have been on a panel with him at some point.
I just sent the cover image to you, and you can see how it looks, just about like what you said. It's in the group chat.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see it. Gotcha. Yeah.
So think big with your natural disasters, and think big about the consequences of what comes after.
Yeah. The disaster itself is bad news, but the aftermath is worth exploring. That is also where I think the entire series, HBO's Treme, takes place in the wake of Katrina. And I think the cleanup and everything else. I never watched an episode. I heard it was really good. No clue. But that shows that there's just ripe opportunity there. And writers, I've never met a writer, although I know they exist, who worries about what their next book is going to be, because ideas are cheap. Ideas just kind of roll around. Terry's probably got 50 or 60 novel ideas. I've got dozens per series that are there, and I'm always writing new ones down, especially after I talk with Terry for 15 minutes. He gives me a new idea all the time.
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby. So, just looking at the news reports from things like this that are going on gives you plenty of opportunity to incorporate that into your book. And think about this. You can incorporate this into your far future science fiction. I mean, this is stuff that's going to happen. Should we ever colonize the stars? This isn't going away. This kind of crap is going to happen. It just is. On some level, it will. It doesn't matter if it's a human made structure failing that exposes a whole shitload of people to something, or if it's a quote unquote natural event that the planet or planetoid or meteor or asteroid, whatever, experiences. These are all things that you can use as backdrops. And it's, the thing is, it's cheap. It is low hanging fruit that you can always go to add suspense. And if you do it right, then it doesn't seem as cheesy. If you have certain plot elements tied to it, then there's an actual reason for it to be there. And like I said, piling complication upon complication upon complication is going to keep the reader going crazy. And it's going to keep your characters going crazy, which is why the reader will keep reading.
And if you want to embrace the cheese, you can go the Sharknado route and just take it as far as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And then go a little further.
So for those of you that's seen Spaceballs, this would be ludicrous speed.
They've gone plaid.
They've gone plaid. Oh my God, they've gone plaid. Exactly. So, folks, it's something to really consider. It's just, and then of course you got the natural disaster movies in the sense that, okay, a genetics lab gets flooded, all this experimental shit goes out into the ocean, plankton eat it, everything else, and a few years later, you've got just alligators the size of skyscrapers or some shit. I don't know.
Jellygator NATO.
Jellygator NATO. You have stuff like that. That stuff's low hanging fruit too. I think Jake Bible has used that kind of thing. I think there's a bunch of other authors that have used it. Shit, I wouldn't be surprised if a quarter of Severed Press's back catalog is that kind of stuff, and people buy it. So
when you look at these things, write down what the initial natural disaster is, and then just start going down your list of consequences. What is a natural progression from each of the things that goes wrong, and try to at least get a dim view of where things are going to domino into.
Right.
And that's going to give you an idea of how you can continue to put the pressure on your characters as you go forward and drive the plot.
I mean, those of you that watch The Walking Dead and that love zombie flicks, are the zombies really ever the story? They're not. They're the backdrop. They're the complication. They're the ever-present threat that disrupts and is always in the back of these people's minds. But they are not the story. They're not the story at all. They are merely an occasional or the obstacle to get past. The Jake Bible's Suburbia series, God, that guy needs to start paying us for free advertising. Free advertising?
Send him a bill.
Yeah, I'll send him a bill. In his Suburbia series, the zombies aren't the problem. It's the people that are living together that's the problem.
It's the homeowners association.
It's the homeowners association. I mean, the zombies provide the complications and the kind of crazy things that need to happen, and they provide the action points and everything else. But so much of the story is really about how these people interact with one another and the kinds of crazy shit you can actually see people doing. It's almost like, okay, I've got this Napoleon complex, this natural disaster happens, and I'm going to still act like my position matters. My position, now that the world is gone, that somehow I'm still in charge, even though there's no reason for me to be in charge. But because human beings are pack animals, essentially, we will follow a leader like that. In many instances, whenever there's some kind of crazy thing that happens, somebody stands up and starts showing leadership, people will gather around them. It's just the way it happens. And then you have this really interesting story you can write about a completely incompetent leader, basically leading these people along. It could be a lot of fun. It could be very hilarious. It doesn't have to be all maudlin and grim. You can make this just absolutely hilarious. Why is he in charge? Well, he was a CEO of so-and-so company. Didn't he bankrupt that one? Yeah, but he was still a CEO. Yes, like that.
Because things worked out so well the first time.
Yeah, but then you have the character go, yes, but there's no golden parachutes in the apocalypse. Oh, wow. All right. See? Here we go again. I'm getting more ideas than even dialogue. It's frightening. Anyway, have we apocalypsed ourselves to death? We weathered ourselves?
I like the way you said that. Have we apocalypsed ourselves to death?
Yeah, after I said that, I was like, maybe not my best choice of words. But anyway, I'm sure somebody will be quoting that. So yeah, as I look out my window and watch more rain coming, I think I heard a boom of thunder a little earlier. Yeah, fun. Is it all quiet where you are, or is it still? Oh yeah, you don't know.
I have noise canceling headphones on. I have no idea. It could be like really bad outside, and I don't know yet.
Yeah, I'll have to check your radar.
But anyway, it's time to drag this episode to a close, folks. It's always a pleasure to have you come and check us out. We're glad to see you. I'm pretty sure that the reverse is not true, but we are on video anyway.
Yes.
So, folks, if we missed something or you'd like to suggest other topics we could talk about, send us a note at show@deadrobotsociety.com. You can find Paul on Twitter at Paul_E_Cooley because he's young enough to understand Twitter. Better yet, find us on Facebook at the Listeners of the Dead Robot Society Facebook group. You can find us on YouTube at YouTube/DRS podcast.
YouTube.com/DRS podcast.
Isn't that understood? The .com?
I'm not even going to address that. Continue.
And of course, we have to thank the good folks at podhoster.com who keep all of the audio episodes for this almost 500 episodes for your listening pleasure. We, of course, have to mention the good folks on Patreon at patreon.com/DRS podcast who are supporting this podcast for us and keeping us with the equipment we need to keep bringing you our, inane banter.
Equipment and hosting costs.
That too.
Yes. And our $10 level patrons at this time are Drew Bernardi, Robert Slade, John Kilgallen, Chris Winder, Isabel Cushy, Andre Conde Moraes, DJ Chamberlain, Jonathan Zarusin, J.R. Hanley.
Just spit it out.
Slippery When Wet James, Caleb Slippery When Wet James, and Sue the Cat Whisperer Bayman. Caleb, seriously?
I expect the KY references at any time.
I'm not touching it. I'm not going near it. I'm going to pretend it's just over there somewhere.
Patrons, thank you so much for supporting this podcast with your hard-earned dollars. We deeply appreciate it. And everyone else, thank you for supporting us with your time and your attention.
Yes. Thank you very much for being here.
Stay dry, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.